We're going to talk about sampling stations today. This is the last scheduled webinar we have for the month of May. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump right in. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the chat at the bottom of your screen to everyone, and we'll take a look at your questions as we go along. Or if you want to unmute and ask a question, that's fine as well too. But just for background noise, we'll keep muted unless you do have a question. You'll hear some of the activity here in our shipping area. Everyone else is gone for the day. They work early shifts here. And we are in the sampling section of our factory where we build all of our sampling stations. We have one of our Kupferle vans here, and this of course is the virtual van tour that we've been doing for the month of May. Hopefully we can get out and do some real van tours sometime this summer. We're hoping July possibly. But today we're going to talk about collecting quality water samples and sampling stations. Let's go ahead and jump in here. So two things, I'll send you a few things after this session is over. We have a 4-page brochure that we call Collecting Water Quality Samples, and it has a lot of good information there. History of sampling, history of potable water, why do we sample for total coliforms, some language in the EPA revision, a nice 8-step how to collect an effective sample, and then of course a list of the different sampling stations that we provide. One other new product that we have out this year is this electric evacuation pump. If you're familiar with our sampling stations, as you can see in the picture there on the brochure, ours have evacuation lines built in, so there's no weep holes in our sampling stations because you don't want to get cross-contamination from the groundwater. So usually we had a hand pump that you'd use to connect to this petcock and pump out the standing water out of the standing pipe after you took samples in the wintertime, especially so you didn't have freezing issues. Well, now we have an electric pump, and I'll show you how this works here in a little bit, where you just connect the pump, you turn the switch, and it actually evacuates your sampling stations lickety-split, a lot better than the hand pump that we had before. So those are a couple things I'll send you after the session, along with some information about the sampling stations themselves. So when the EPA did the revision of the total coliform rule back in 2013, it went into effect in, I believe, April of 2014. They actually added some new language to the rule talking about dedicated sampling stations. They had never mentioned or really had much to do with sampling stations in the rules before, but they saw that sampling stations were a good idea, so they put the language in there to let folks know that sampling stations are a good practice. It's not a requirement, but they're a good practice for collecting water quality samples. And the language you see on the screen here actually comes right from the rule. So it says here, the EPA is specifically allowing the use of dedicated sampling stations for the following reasons, and they give 3 reasons on good practices. The first one is to reduce the potential contamination of the sampling taps. When you control the tap, you control the contamination on the tap. When you have dedicated sampling stations, no one else uses that tap but your authorized people who have access to the site, who can unlock the sampling tap and so on and so forth. If you're taking samples from the Burger King bathroom, you have no control over who's using that tap or what's been going on with that tap. So utilities will have more control to prevent contamination of the sampling tap by preventing its use by unauthorized persons and allowing no routine use of the tap except for sampling. So these stations that we manufacture are manufactured, they're designed specifically for just taking water quality samples, whether it be for bacteria, chlorine, whatever it might be. Of course, lead and copper, they're revising that rule right now, but lead and copper you still take from the house. But any of the other samples that you want to take from your water main system, you can take from these sampling stations. The second reason why they're recommending these as a good practice is it facilitates access to the sampling tap. When you have dedicated sampling stations, you own the site so that you can get to it anytime you want. You don't have to wait for someone to be home or the business to be open to get your samples. You can actually get to your site 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year if you want. So currently systems may be constrained by where they sample. For example, only at public buildings or in certain individual customers' homes. I saw this in the last recession 10 years ago. When the recession happened 10 years ago with the housing recession, a lot of people had to take second jobs, or a lot of people went back to work to cover costs and so on and so forth. And a lot of systems I came across who were taking samples from houses were having issues trying to get to the sampling spigots. Now, a lot of systems take their samples from the side of the garage with the hose bibs. That's usually not the best place to take a sample from, because hose bibs usually have threads on the nozzle, and threads collect gunk. So avoiding those types of taps is probably a good idea. That's why dedicated sampling stations, you control the site and you control the tap, so you can get to it anytime you want, and you know that tap's gonna be clean and no one else is using that tap. The third reason that they have in their language about dedicated sampling stations and why they're good practice is it improves the representation of the sample of the distribution system. Dedicated sampling stations are tapped right to the main. So when you take a sample from a sampling station, you're really getting a good sample of water that you are producing for your system, something that's not being filtered through a water softener or a plumbing system of someone's house or business. So when you get a sample from a sample station, it comes right off the water main and not through the filtration or the piping of some other building before you actually get your sample. This allows dedicated sampling taps in areas where systems may not have been able to gain access, and will facilitate better sample representation of the distribution system. You really get a better sample of the water that you produce than something that's going through someone's plumbing, either through a business or house. And I would add a fourth reason to a dedicated sampling stations, and this is the world we're living in today, and that's the COVID-19. COVID-19 has changed a lot of things. One thing it has changed is many systems now are very apprehensive to send their collectors into houses or businesses because of the COVID virus. So doing dedicated sampling stations removes this possibility of going onto personal property, going to houses and taking samples. It protects their collectors, it protects the people in the houses. So a lot of our sampling area here has just been going gangbusters since about March, and we're just trying to keep pace because a lot of folks are scrambling to put in sampling stations so they can keep their people out of the houses and businesses for taking samples. So dedicated sampling stations versus private public taps. Some advantages, like we talked about with dedicated sampling stations, is you secure the site, you own the site, it's not shared, you control the tap, samples from the water main. Liability, this is something that I see more and more as I travel around the country. Anytime you step on personal property, you put your utility at a liability issue, whether you're collecting samples or whatever. So better to stay off personal property, or else I've heard everything from property damage claims to sexual harassment claims, where a collector, I think it was down in North Carolina, was going in to take a sample at a house. There was a young woman sitting on the couch watching TV, probably in her 20s. He took a sample, he went back to the city hall, and by the time he got back to city hall, the boyfriend had called and said that he had sexually harassed his girlfriend. They were going to sue, and da-da-da-da-da. So anytime you go into personal property, there's always a liability issue, and those are nice things to avoid. So dedicated sampling stations can help you avoid those. 24/365 access, you can get to them anytime you want. Reduced chance of false positives because you control the tap and the contamination of the tap. You control the tap. No cross-contamination issues. Our sampling stations do not have drain holes, so that you can't get cross-contamination from the groundwater. You want to try and avoid any type of hydrant or a device that drains to ground, because if you have a device that drains to ground, you have the potential of getting cross-contamination from the groundwater, okay? Ours are designed so you can do maintenance above ground. Any type of maintenance like changing seats and so on and so forth is very simple, and I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. And then another big factor with dedicated sampling stations, which is important, is every state requires the utilities to submit a plan of where their sites are located in the system, and they have to have that plan approved by their state EPA office, whether it's called the DNR or the Water Quality Institute, whatever it is. They're all different names around the country, but basically it's your EPA office. And you have to submit those plans to have them approved. Now, if you have currently a house where you're taking a sample from, and that house sells and someone else moves into the house and the new person didn't want you to take the samples there, then you have to find another house in that area to represent the distribution system, and you have to resubmit your plan and get approved and so on and so forth. When you do dedicated sampling stations, once you have your plan approved with your dedicated sampling stations, you're done. There is no change unless you're adding new stations as you grow your community. So once you have your plan set, you don't have to go back and redo your plan and so on and so forth. Many people who put in dedicated sampling stations usually just keep the same address and they put the station out in the easement of that same address. So they really don't even have to change their site plans when they put in their stations to begin with too. So these are some good advantages of doing sampling stations, dedicated stations. Some disadvantages, higher initial cost. Of course, you buy stations. So this is something you want to budget for. If you have 100 sampling sites, one thing you want to do is maybe put it in your budget where you put in 20 a year. So over a period of 5 years, you can get all your sampling stations in. So it doesn't have to be a one-time cost where you buy everything at once. You can actually put in your budget and makes it very easy and reasonable to put in the sampling stations. So there's initial higher cost of purchasing the stations. Another is just routine maintenance, changing seats, O-rings, so on and so forth. So when you do any type of hydrant, any type of asset on a distribution system, they need maintenance, like fire hydrants and so on and so forth. So again, cost of maintenance and a higher cost of adding sampling stations. One thing I would recommend, though, if you do go to dedicated sampling stations, is put them in your specs. It's the easiest thing to put into your specs. They're not very expensive. Most of these stations cost about $1,000 list or less. So putting them in your specs makes it so that when your contractors add on new projects, new neighborhoods, new development, they automatically go into your system. So this is the first thing. If you're going to do dedicated sampling stations, the first thing you want to do is put them in your specs. Okay? Let's talk about some of the stations that Kupferle produces. We probably have the most selections of sampling stations in the business. So we're going to talk about a number of these. The first one we'll talk about is this thing called the 88 series. This is the one we've been making for a long time, actually since 1988. That's where it got its name. We're very creative here in our naming. So this is the 88 series, and we have a number of stations in the sampling series of the 88 series. One that you may have seen or actually may have used in the past is this one called the 88, Eclipse 88. This is one we've been making for a long, long time. When the no lead brass rule came about 6-7 years ago, how many years it was ago, and we had to go to the no lead brass, we did a design change, and we've really kind of gotten away from this station to a new design that we call the 88SS. And what we did when that no brass rule came into effect is we went to an all stainless steel waterway, which is a much more durable metal than the no lead brass. No lead brass, if you worked with it, is very brittle. You get a lot of cracks and fissures in no lead brass compared to the old version of the leaded brass. So stainless steel is a much more durable metal, and the cost difference after the no lead brass, which went up about 30%, brass prices went up considerably after the law went into effect, that you can really do a surgical stainless steel for about the same cost. So this is the one that we recommend for cold climates, those climates that have freezing winters where you get below freezing. The nice thing about this station, what a lot of people like, is the enclosure. It's a cast aluminum powder coated enclosure. So it's very heavy duty. I'll show you that here in a minute. And so it can take a lot of abuse, a lot of banging, hitting. And most of the time these stations are sitting out on the ground like you see on the picture here on the screen. And the weed whackers and the lawnmowers bump up against this all the time. Well, this is a station that can take the hits, and it's not going to put any type of dents into this station at all. So it's a very heavy duty station. It can be out in the elements. It can take a beating. And it's going to last a long, long time. In fact, I've come across some systems where they've had some of these 88 series sampling stations in their system for 20, 25 years. And they've done parts and they've kept them up to date, but the enclosure's still the same enclosure, a bit faded from the sun, but still intact and in very good shape. Like I talked about before, these are set up designed for sampling, only sampling water. Allow sampling. You tap these to the main with a 3/4 inch, usually saddle tap connection to the water main. All surgical stainless steel waterway, unthreaded sampling nozzle, and we put caps on the nozzles, which I'll show you here in a minute. Unthreaded because you don't want to collect gunk in your threads. So two things a sampling station should never have are threads on the nozzle and a drain hole. And we take care of both of those. We have no threads on the nozzle, and we plug the drain and do an evacuation line, which I'll show you here in a minute. They're very secure, lockable aluminum cast enclosures. We can do a plastic version of this too, if you like a plastic cover on it. Any depth of bury that you may require. We have, actually it's a stainless steel siphoning vent tube that ensures no cross contamination. So again, we plug the vent and we use an evacuation tube that goes up inside the box where you actually evacuate the standing pipe. And I'll show you how that works. Fully serviceable from above ground. And the new thing that we have with this is the electric pump. This is something that we just came out with in January. So instead of using the hand pumps where you're pumping with the bilge pump, this one is actually an electric hand pump where you just attach it to the evacuation petcock, you turn a switch, and it evacuates all the water in the standing pipe so you don't have freezing issues in the wintertime. Highly recommend using this. It's very easy, it's very effective. It's plug into the wall, recharge it, hard shell case. So it's a very nice new feature that we have for our cold climate sampling stations is the electric pump. Let's take a look at the spec on this. So if you look at the spec, down here you see that this is where the valve is, down below the frost line. And we plug the drain hole in this valve when we run this evacuation line up inside the box to this petcock that you see in kind of in this blown up picture to the left. The petcock is attached to the drain hole. So once the seat goes down and closes like a fire hydrant, after you've been flushing the hydrant, a little bit of water is above the seat in the standing pipe, just like in a fire hydrant or any other hydrant that you exercise. Of course, you don't want to leave that water in there during the winter time because it may freeze the line. So what you do is you attach that electric pump to this petcock, you open it up, you turn on the switch, and it sucks out the rest of the water through the drain hole, up through the evacuation line and out the petcock so that your waterway stays clean and it's dry and it won't freeze, okay? Most people do a installation like this where the station just rests at the grade level. We do have the option of doing a pedestal mount. So if you want something a little bit more at eye level, we can do a pedestal mount that you mount onto a concrete pad, 4-bolt flange. We can do different colors too on this. The standard color is green, but we can also do different colors. A lot of Florida systems like to use the safety blue. We've done a chocolate brown for some California systems. So we can do different colors than green. In fact, we did some of these stations for a city down in Arizona, and they insisted that a green sampling station was not a good idea because it sticks up out of the desert and it says, come vandalize me. So we actually did a desert tan color for this particular city down in Arizona, and they had a number of stations that they put in. The other thing we can do, if you look on the screen here, is we can do a cast artwork of your city's logo, and we can cast that on the door. The usual cost for this is about $400, but if you buy 20 stations on your first order, or on any order of 20 or more, we can do the cast logo for free at no cost. And then every time you want to get more stations, either 1 or 2 or 10 or 12, you can order any quantity. You can always get the casting of your door. It comes standard at the initial order. After we get your logo casted, every time you order any quantity of stations, you can have that cast on your door. We probably have about 400 systems that have castings on their door. We have a number of systems that like to put the cast on the door. In fact, this one system down in Arizona I talked about had the phone number on the cast of the door. And I asked the superintendent why they put the phone number on the door, and he said, well, a lot of older folks down here like to run over things, and it just speeds up the process when someone can pull out their cell phone and there's a phone number of the box laying on the ground. They can call and let us know that someone has hit one of our items. So you can put anything on the door, but most people put a logo of their city. So this is the 88SS, and this is the one I'd really recommend for cold climates. We also have a warm climate version of the same station. The only difference between the warm climate and the cold climate version is that this one has no valve down below a frost line because we don't have freezing. The valve and everything is up here at the top of the box. And this is one difference between our designs and other manufacturers of sampling stations. We use a hydrant design with all of our sampling stations so that you have an operating rod and a seat, just like a hydrant, okay? This is important because most other sampling stations use a ball valve for operations where you turn a handle and open and close the ball valve to have the water flow. The only problem with the ball valve design is when the ball valve goes bad, you have to dig the whole station up, throw it in the trash, and install a whole new station, which involves digging, and nobody likes to dig. So that's one design of ours that really makes them very efficient, is that once you put these in the ground, you never dig them up, because you can do all your maintenance from above ground, just like you do a fire hydrant or any other type of blow off or hydrant that you might have in your system. Even in the warm climate version here, we do not use a ball valve in this particular station. We use a short hydrant design, and I'll show you that here in a minute with one of the samples behind me. And then you actually take your sample from the petcock on this one. So this is a wet barrel design. The standing pipe is wet all the time since I'm not in a freezing area. And I just turn it on, I flush some water, I open up my petcock, I get a nice 1/4-inch stream where I can take my sample, and I move on to the next place. They're all lockable. We can do the pedestals with these, we can do the logos with these, but it's really the big difference between the two, between the warm climate and the cold climate, is this is a wet barrel design that does not have a valve down below. It's a 1/2-inch connection at the bottom to connect 1/2 inch instead of a 3/4. So those are the two stations I'd probably recommend the most. Of the ones that we do, these are probably the ones that we sell the most. In fact, I know the ADSS is the best-selling sampling station in the US and in Canada, just because of its design. We have one other one that some systems still use. This is an older design that we did, again, back probably in the 90s. This is the warm climate version. It's called the 88WC, not stainless steel, all brass design. And this has a ball valve. So this one does have a ball valve, as you can see here in the picture, and then a 1/4-inch petcock sampling point. So we still have some systems out in California that like this one, they use it. So this is just another option. The only advantage of using this over the 88WCSS warm climate version is that this has a 1-inch standing pipe. So you get a little bit more flow. The other one's a 1/2-inch pipe. So that's really the only difference between the two as far as performance, okay? Another series of sampling stations we have is this one called the 66 Main Guard series. This is one that we developed, again, about 10 years ago when we did the stainless steel waterways. These stations are exactly the same as the 88 series, except the enclosure is different. The waterways and the designs are all the same. It just has a different box. So these are, instead of being a cast aluminum, these are a fabricated aluminum box, and they're going to look like this. So let's take a look at the cold climate version. This is called the Main Guard 66. And here's a picture of how you used to pump them out with a hand pump, but now you want to use the electric pump because it's a lot more efficient, a lot better. This is what they look like when they're in the ground. This is a 4-foot fabricated aluminum box where you bury a foot in the ground with 3 feet above. So you're going to have it up above the ground. The top lid opens up at the top, and then the front door drops in the front, and you can access the same waterway that you'd have in your 88. If you're going to use these stations, I would highly recommend that you use our flange-based option, where we can put flanges on the base and you can mount it onto a concrete pad, because if these are going to be in areas that have grass with weed whackers and lawnmowers, you want to have some type of perimeter around this station, because this will take a beating over time when they bump up against this. This is not going to wear quite as well as the cast aluminum enclosure. This one's going to get dents and marks and so on and so forth. So if you do the 66, I'd really recommend that you put it on a concrete base so that you give it some protection from the weed whackers and the lawn mowers. Same thing with the 66WC. Again, it's the same waterway as the Eclipse green box versions that you see behind me. It's just a different enclosure. So same 1/2-inch connection, same standing pipe that's wet all the time, but it's just in an enclosure that's a fabricated aluminum instead of a cast aluminum. A little less expensive than the 88s, but again, if you do these, I'd put them on a concrete pedestal just to give them a little bit more protection. One other sampling station that we do offer in this series, which is interesting, is this one's called the 66MB. We developed this station basically for Chicago. Chicago City takes all their samples from fire stations. So they have 600 fire stations in the city of Chicago. And of course, they take their samples from fire stations because fire stations are open 24/7. They can always get in there and they can get their samples. But they went into the sampling stations to take the samples, went into the fire stations. A lot of times, the kitchen sinks were full of dishes or it was dirty, or they didn't have control of the tap was the big thing. They didn't have control of the tap, and was the tap clean, and so on and so forth. So we actually, they bought these and they mount them in fire stations and other public buildings that they can get to. They have some of these at the airport and some other places. And they use a continuous flush. So this is what it's going to look like when it's mounted to the wall. We use a gooseneck nozzle on this one that's different. And then the water goes straight down to a PVC pipe and it drains usually to a sink or a floor drain of some sort. And Chicago actually mounts these in places where it's a continuous flow. So they never turn these off. So when the sample collector comes, they open up the door, they stick in their bottle, they close the door, and boom, they're on their way. So these are another option if you want to have still go into buildings like police stations and fire stations and other public buildings, and they'll allow you to mount these to the wall. This is the way that you can still have your sampling station that you control. You control the tap in the station, but it's actually inside of a building itself. Okay, so this is called the 66 MB. Now, if you don't have sampling stations now, and you'd really like to get sampling stations in very quickly and inexpensively, we have two models that we call meter resetter sampling stations. So this is for those folks who live in areas where they have meter boxes in the yards. Once you get up north of about, Des Moines, Iowa, south of Chicago, Philadelphia, and north, usually you see a lot of the meters start disappearing in the houses because the depth of bury is a little bit too deep for a meter box. But if you're in those areas that are south of that and you have meter boxes in your yard, this is a very quick and easy way to install sampling stations in your system very quickly and inexpensively. We have two models of this. This is the brass body version. It's called the 94WM. So again, these are designed to take samples, all brass waterway, fits inside a standard meter box. So the best thing to do with this one is take a look at the spec. So the way these go into the meter boxes is I take my customer meter out of the setter, I put the resetter with the sampling station in the setter, and I reset my customer's meter here in the resetter. So I'm not interrupting the customer's metering or flow or anything, and they don't even know the sampling station is in the box in their yard. So this is a very easy one to install. I don't have to tap or dig the main. I could have one person just go around, they pull the meter, they put this in the setter, they reset the customer's meter, and boom, I have a sampling station ready to go. So that's how easy it is for these to install. They have a spring-loaded valve, as you can see in the picture here, with a coarse thread. There are other manufacturers out there that do a meter resetter sampling station. All of them use a quick disconnect instead of a coarse threaded nozzle that we have here. We used to do a quick disconnect years and years ago, probably about 10 or 11 years ago. The problem with the quick disconnects is over time, after you do this a number of times, taking it on and taking it off, they tend to leak. Then the station will start losing its fittings and it'll start to leak, and that quick disconnect will start to leak. So many times I'll come across a system, they have the quick disconnects, and the first question I ask them is, are they leaking? And the answer is usually yes. So we can retrofit existing quick disconnect systems with our nozzle and our sampling rod. So if you are one of these folks who have quick disconnects that are leaking, we can get you a retro kit, and you can change your whole system over to this better design of the coarse thread and spring-loaded nozzle where they don't leak, and you're not putting any pressure on that resetter or that setter itself. Okay, so let's take a look at the one for the PVC. So we also manufacture one in PVC. This is a solid schedule PVC 80 body. We do this here in the factory. These run about $400 list, so they're probably the least expensive sampling station out on the marketplace. The one advantage to the PVC version versus the brass version is the cost is one, but also I have the option of being able to rotate the arms on this. So a lot of times when I go out now and you see a lot of these meters, you know, all meters used to kind of look alike years ago, but now they're doing a lot of these composite meters, and they're all different shapes and sizes. So sometimes you might have an issue getting your meter to fit into the box. So this resetter, after I'm putting in a resetter especially, this will help you adjust those arms and lock them in place to reset that meter in the box in case I have a tight fit. Another advantage is in this picture here, you see if I break a horn, I can replace the horn. So this is a 3 O-ring pocket hole that we have in this solid PVC Schedule 80. That's for the break time. We have a 3 O-ring pocket. So when you put the arms in here and you put the meter in here and you tighten it up, it tightens it up like a Chinese finger puzzle. We had this tested in a lab and it failed at 350 PSI. And the place where it failed was here where the gasket met the meter in the arm. It wasn't at the body itself. So this is a very solid meter resetter sampling station. And what the operators would use is this sampling rod to take the sample, and I'll show you actually how that works here in just a minute. So again, a good way to get sampling stations into your system very quickly and very inexpensively are these meter resetter sampling stations, and we have a number of systems around the country that use these in their systems, especially Texas, California, Florida, other places along those lines. Last but not least, we have another sampling series called the 82 series. 82s are designed for higher flow. They're a 2-inch sampling tap, so I can get a lot of flow. So if you want to get a lot of flow, this is one you want to look at. But the big difference between these and all the other stations that we looked at is the evacuation of the line. And all the stations we looked at, especially for cold climates, we use the electric pump or the hand pump to evacuate the standing pipe after we take our sample in the wintertime to keep it from freezing. What these systems do is they actually have a built-in mechanical drain on here. So it's a 3-way stainless steel ball valve that operates the device. Even in cold climates, this is a wet barrel sampling station. So the barrel, the standing pipe is wet all the time. And what this mechanical drain does is it reads the temperature of the water. And when the water gets below 38 degrees, it starts opening up and it starts draining water out of the station to keep the standing pipe from freezing. So if you're a system that doesn't want to rely on your collectors to pump out the stations to make sure that they're not freezing, this is one you might want to take a look at because it automatically purges itself and keeps it from freezing. So let me show you what the spec looks like on this one. So it'll be buried in the ground about 3/4 of the way up the base. And then the water actually drains out of this mechanical drain into a standing PVC pipe that carries that water all the way down below the freeze line, okay? So we have this for a cold version and a warm version. We had a system just down in Texas that ordered a bunch of these, and they're gonna use the warm climate version. But again, they both have the mechanical drain, so if you do get below that certain temperature, it'll start bleeding water. But especially the ball valve on the cold climate version, we tested down to 25 below zero, and the standing pipe didn't freeze. So the stainless steel ball valve is very durable down to about 25 degrees below zero, and the mechanical drain will purge the water once the water gets to a certain temperature and below. The colder it gets, the more water it bleeds out of the system. Okay, so this is just another option, lockable plastic enclosure on these. Very easy to install, 2-inch tap, usually saddle tap to the main. All right, any questions up to this point? If you do, you can type them in at the bottom there. And if not, we'll take a look at some of the products themselves here that are behind me. Chris? Oh, okay, good. We'll move on. Double click this so I can get it up. There we go. All right. All right, let me show you some of the stations that we have behind me here. So, this one here is the 88SS. This is for the cold climates. So as you can see, this one has the valve down at the bottom. So I'm going to give you a cross section of this so you can see how the evacuation line looks in the bottom. So again, we have a valve with the evacuation line. So we plug the drain hole and have an evacuation line that goes up inside the box. So what the operator would do at this station is they come to the station, they put the box, open it up, I turn it on, I flush some water. I have the caps on the outlets, so we take those off. We put caps on the outlets to keep the bugs and the bees and the ants and the vermin from the summertime from getting in there and making nests inside your waterway, okay? So I take my caps off, I flush. Once I do my flush, I get a 1/4 stream, I take my sample, I turn it off. Now in the wintertime, a little bit of water, anytime there's gonna be a little water above the standing pipe, in the wintertime, that can be a problem for freezing. So what we use again is we have our electric pump. For many years, we've been using the hand pump. So once the station is shut down, I would open up my petcock. I'd add my hand pump like this and pump it out. But what's better now is I can actually put on this electric pump. So I just attach the electric pump here. I open up the petcock and I turn it on, and it sucks all the water out of the standing pipe automatically for me. Usually takes about 15 seconds or less, depending on your depth of bear. After I'm done, I close my petcock, I put my caps on, I move on to the next station. And again, the reason why a lot of people like this particular station is it's a cast aluminum enclosure, very heavy duty. It can take a beating and not show any scars for it, okay? To do the maintenance on these, this is the 66 version of the same thing. So it has the same waterway, just a different enclosure. So this is a fabricated aluminum enclosure instead of a cast aluminum. But to do maintenance on either of these waterways, I turn the water off to the station, and all I have to do is just get this and unscrew the top. The only thing to replace is a seat. Okay, it's the only maintenance you do on these. So maintenance from above ground, very inexpensive. It's not a ball valve operated station, so you don't have to dig up the station and replace it. Once these go in the ground, they stay in the ground for a long, long time, and you just do maintenance on them. Okay? The warm climate version of the same series, either for the 66 or the 88, will look like this. So again, on this one, there is no valve down below. It's just a straight standing pipe, 1/2 inch. And here I have my caps. So the operator would come, they flush some water, they take the sample from the petcock. And to do maintenance on this one, it's very easy. Again, hex bushing at the top, I spin it off, and it's a hydrant design. But it's a short hydrant design. So the plunger is very short, and the only thing I replace on this is the seat. We have a number of systems that use this in Florida, other states. Very, very good warm climate sampling station, lasts a long, long time. Maintenance is very easy. I don't have to dig it up. Again, no ball valves. You don't use any ball valves in these designs so that you don't have to replace ball valves or dig the station up. And I'm done, I put my caps back on and I lock it up. Okay? 1/2 inch connection on the warm climate. The other stations that we talked about were the meter resetter sampling station. So this is the brass version, okay? We have a O-ring spring-loaded coarse threaded nozzle. So the cap fits on very tightly to keep, again, your sampling point clean. So this is the brass version. Let me show you the PVC version. The PVC version looks like this. Again, the advantage of the PVC version is I can actually adjust the arms and I can lock them in place. If I break an arm for some reason, a horn, I can actually get a replacement. So this is a 3 O-ring pocket. I put that in there, I tighten it all down, seals it all up. Again, same sampling point, a spring-loaded, coarse-threaded sampling point. So what the operators would do with these, they would carry around a carrying case that looks like this. So they take the carrying case to the site, I open up the meter box, I pop the cap, I disinfect the nozzle. Inside the case is my sampling rod. We have caps and all the outlets for the sampling rod as well. So I take the caps off my sampling rod, and then all I do, from a standing position, I don't have to get down on my knees or anything, from a standing position, I put this onto the nozzle, I thread it on, that pushes down the nozzle, starts a flow of water. Then I can do a blow off up here, and I can take my sample from the 1/4 inch sampling point here. Very simple. I don't put any pressure on the setter or the resetter. I spin this off, I put my cap back on, and I close up the meter box and I move to my next spot. Even if you're not using the meter resetter sampling station for taking samples or using one of these other sampling stations, and if you are using meter resetters, I always recommend to get maybe 1 or 2 pair extra. Because if you do get a positive hit and you have to take your upstream and your downstream samples of water due to the coliform rule, If you have these on hand on the shelf, you could go and you can put these in the meters upstream and downstream in those sites where you have to take the additional samples, and you don't have to knock on anybody's house. In this day and age, after Flint, Michigan, and other incidents, knocking on someone's house and saying, "Hi, I'm from I'm from the water company, and I need to take a sample of water from your house," and they're not usually a house that you knock on, it's going to be on Facebook in about 20 minutes, and then it's going to cause a lot of issues. This is a way that you can get those upstream and downstream samples without having to knock on anyone's door. Okay, so they're nice to have maybe 2 or 4 of these on hand. So in case you do get that hit, I can go put them in those meter boxes. I can take my extra samples. And when I'm done, I can just take them out and put them back on the shelf. Okay? So those are some of the sampling stations that we manufacture here at Kupferle that we would recommend using. And again, dedicated sampling stations in general is a good idea. Getting your folks outside of houses and businesses, being able to control your own taps and your own sites is a good thing. Many of the utilities that I talk to about the advantage of these, one thing that they always mention, almost everyone mentions, is that when you use dedicated sampling stations, your collection times speed up by about 50%. So it takes about half as much time to get your samples as when you go into the house and you take the kitchen sink apart and so on and so forth to take your sample. Much quicker, much easier when you have your own dedicated sites. Chris, any questions? Anybody have any questions about any of our sampling stations or electric pump, anything along those lines? If not, we'll go ahead and say thank you very much for joining us today. If you do have questions, you have my email address. If you'd like to get quotes or more information about any of these stations, please contact me. And I thank you very much for joining today, and we'll see you hopefully on the road with the real van visit sometime in the near future is what we're hoping for. We're looking at July right now. We hope that might be the case. But thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and I'll go ahead and end the session now.